The war had lasted for more than it lasted. If it had stopped in 1947 instead of 1945, there would have been not a single survivor. There would have been nobody to press. There would have been nobody to come. There would have been no political issue. There would have been no Israel. The idea that the world gave Israel to the Jews as a result of what they had suffered during World War II is total and absolute nonsense. Look at what the historians can tell you today about the internal correspondence, the diplomatic correspondence of the various states that voted in the United Nations for or against the partition of Palestine. There was no mention of the Holocaust, what we call today the Holocaust, the genocide of the Jews. No mention of that anywhere. Not even those who advocated a state of Israel, a partition of Palestine, the state of Israel. People like Granados, Guatemala, for instance, a friend of the Jews. What motivated him was the pioneering efforts of the Jews in Palestine, the right of the Jewish people for independence, and that sort of thing. The Holocaust, genocide of the Jews, not a word. Truman didn't want a state of Israel. He opposed it to the last moment. There was no mention of this anywhere in American diplomatic correspondence.
Hello brothers and sisters, I just hope that you're fine wherever you are today. Now, I was so interested in learning this part of history about the Holocaust that happened to Jewish people. And this is some part of history that mostly, white people, they really value this information. And not like I'm trying to address them or something. I'm just curious, and I just want to learn more about this. And so this is why I do this research, to find these videos, to also learn this part of history is important, because I want to know why a couple of things happened in history. And like, if the Holocaust was something which was so much important to them that they were separated, I'm trying to learn the reason as to why that was so much important. And also, I'm getting to learn why some things are happening. In this video was entitled Israel and the Holocaust, Debunking the Myth. This was somebody, a professor called Yehuda Bahua, a renowned historian on the Holocaust. And he talked about some things that he tries to debunk. And he says that there is a common misconception that it is widely believed that the state of Israel was established because of the Holocaust. And he says that this is a myth. One thing that I want to say up front before even going forward with the video is that I'm not an expert in this topic. So I'm just a student who is still learning. That's why I present this to you, so that we can learn together. Also, I did a couple of research about what he backed up by saying this. Like, he gave evidence as to why the state of Israel was not majorly formed because of the Holocaust, rather some, other reasons. So I want us to watch this video. These are presented Gintek Stories, and as usual, I'll be back and we'll talk about this. If you're watching this video for the first time, I'll most definitely ask you to subscribe to this channel. Black folks who are watching this video, we are here to learn. I'm here to learn. That's why I'm trying to bring something different so that we can all get to learn. The question of Israel and Palestine, these are a topic that has been going online for the longest time. The religious war, the human activities that has been happening. So I gained an interest in this topic, and I saw to it like we all need to learn. And I went back during the Holocaust time, a myth which is here to be debunked, the formation of Israel. Was Israel formed as a result of the Holocaust? Tell me what you think even before jumping right into the video. I'll be back with my commentary as usual. Nothing much to say because I'm not an expert in this topic, but I believe that we are going to be learning. Let's dive right into it.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends of Masu'ah, Abner Shalev. It is, I suppose, the task, or one of the main tasks of a historian, to debunk myths. And what I would like to do is to address a myth that is common amongst all Israelis, from ministers of the government to the ordinary people in the street, common to friends of Israel all over the world, friends of the Jewish people, enemies of the Jewish people, enemies of Israel. They share the myth that Israel is the result of the Holocaust. It is absolutely false. It's a myth. It never happened. Prior to World War II, there were some 4.5 million Jews in what was called Eastern Europe outside of the Soviet Union. These people couldn't stay where they were. They lived among hostile peoples, people who didn't like them, peoples who hated them, many of them, most of them. There was an economic crisis of tremendous proportions. Of 3.3 million Jews in 1939 in Poland, 1/3 were on or below the poverty level. Jewish children couldn't go to school because they didn't have shoes in the winter to go to school with. There was a decline, constant decline in the 1930s. But there was nowhere to go. America was closed. Britain was closed. Western Europe had closed by then. South America was closed. Palestine was closed by the British from 1936 on. In 1938-39, this closure became more tight and more tight as time went on. But it was a hope. Now, had there been a possibility for Jews to leave Eastern Europe to go to Palestine, the estimate is that at least 1/3 of this 4.5 million would immediately have taken the opportunity to come. It would have been extremely difficult. There were only 500,000 Jews in Palestine at the moment. But they would have come, not all at once. You know, all that was stopped by the Holocaust. There was nothing left after. Out of 3.3 million Jews, 3 million Jews were killed. The Holocaust almost prevented the rise of the State of Israel. More Holocaust, less Israel. That's the equation. World War II ended in 1945. Between 1945 and 1947, about 300 to 350,000 Jews, not only survivors, also to a large extent, those Jews had escaped into the interior of the Soviet Union and came back after the war. These 300 to 350,000 Jews came to Central Europe, largely to the American zones of Germany and Austria after the victory. And they formed a small population there with whom the Allies didn't know what to do. The Americans didn't want them. The British certainly didn't want them. Nobody else wanted them. And most of them, rightly or wrongly, decided that a place for them was a place where they would determine their own destiny. And a majority of them, large majority of them, wanted to go to Palestine. And they were not persuaded to do that by Palestinian Jewish emissaries. In fact, they criticized those emissaries for not being energetic enough to move the world, to let them go where they wanted to go. Between 1945 and 1948, 69,000 European Jews and North African Jews wanted and did go on illegal ships to come to this country. From 1946 on, they were prevented from doing so and shipped to Cyprus by the British. But there were thousands, tens of thousands, who were willing to do that, were willing to spend time in detention camps in Cyprus on their way, hopefully, to this place. if the war had lasted for more than it lasted, if it had stopped in 1947 instead of 1945, there would have been not a single survivor. There would have been nobody to press. There would have been nobody to come. There would have been no political issue. There would have been no Israel. The idea that the world gave Israel to the Jews as a result of what they had suffered during World War II is total and absolute nonsense. Look at what the historians can tell you today about the internal correspondence, the diplomatic correspondence of the various states that voted in the United Nations for or against the partition of Palestine. There was no mention of the Holocaust, what we call today the Holocaust, the genocide of the Jews. No mention of that anywhere. Not even those who advocated a state of Israel, a partition of Palestine, the state of Israel. People like Granados Guatemala, for instance, a friend of the Jews. What motivated him was the pioneering efforts of the Jews in Palestine, the right of the Jewish people for independence, and that sort of thing. The Holocaust, genocide of the Jews, not a word. Truman didn't want a state of Israel. He opposed it to the last moment. There was no mention of this anywhere in American diplomatic correspondence. No mention of that in French diplomatic correspondence. This is a total invention, a total myth. The considerations for and against the establishment of the State of Israel were of a diplomatic, political, global kind. There was only one exception. Andrei Gromyko, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, on May 14, 1947, made a speech in which he mentioned the destruction of the Jewish people in Europe during the Second World War. How genuine was that? The Soviet Union opposed any mention of the Holocaust. The Soviet Union opposed any memory of the Holocaust by the Jews who had survived in the Soviet Union. They couldn't have cared less. What they wanted is to get the British out of the Middle East, and the Jews were a good tool to do that. And so for purely propagandistic purposes, he mentioned that in his speech. It was a lie. It was propaganda. And he was the only one. Nobody else. It's very important to debunk that myth. Very important. Because the State of Israel almost didn't come into existence. It hung by a thread. Yes, those survivors who had managed to get to Central Europe were a major element. But they were the survivors. Despite the Holocaust, despite it, not because of it. And it was they who created the political conditions, the cul-de-sac, where the Americans didn't know what to do with them. They didn't want them in America. The British wanted them out. Europe didn't want them. Germany didn't want them, and they wanted to go. And that created a discussion at the United Nations that resulted not in the establishment of the State of Israel, but in the possibility of fighting for it.
Welcome back to the channel. I just hope that you're fine wherever you are today. Now, first things that he talks about is the common misconception, and which he addresses that the State of Israel was established because of the Holocaust, which is a myth according to Professor Bauer. Now, the historical context of this is that Professor explains that the idea of Jewish states predates the Holocaust. It happened even way before the Holocaust. The Zionist movement, which advocated for the establishment of a Jewish homeland, began in the late 19th century, long way before World War II. Now, we know that the Holocaust had impact, and it impacted a lot of people differently, right? Now, while the Holocaust had a significant impact on the global support for the establishment of Israel, it was not the sole reason for its creation. The Holocaust highlighted the urgent need for a safe haven for Jews, but the political and social efforts for the Jew state were already in motion. There are a couple of political factors that also affected this. And you realize that Prof. Bauer discusses the geopolitical factors and international support that played crucial roles in establishing Israel in 1948. There are common proofs that he gives as to why Israel was not formed because just the Holocaust. But first is pre-Holocaust Zionist movement. Evidence is in the Zionist movement, which began in the late 19th century, long way before the Holocaust. Historical context. Theodor Herzl, often considered the father of modern political Zionism, convened the first Zionist Congress based in Basel, Switzerland, in 1897. The Congress aimed to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine due to rising anti-Semitism in Europe. Now, there is also supportive information that he gave. Now, the Balfour Declaration of 1917, issued by the British government, expressed support for national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This was a significant milestone in Zionism movement, occurring decades before the Holocaust. 2 is political and diplomatic efforts as an evidence that debunks the myth of the Holocaust as a result of the State of Israel. Now, the establishment of Israel involved extensive political and diplomatic efforts that predated the Holocaust. Historical context. During the British Mandate of Palestine, that is 1920 to 1948, Jewish immigration and settlement in Palestine increased, driven by Zionist movement. Jewish institutions and infrastructure were developed, laying the groundwork for the future state. Also, the Peel Commission of 1937 and the subsequent White Paper of 1939 were British attempts to address the conflict demands of Jewish and Arabs in Palestine. This effort shows that the question of a Jewish state was a significant political issue way before World War II. The third proof is the UN Partition Plan. The United Nations involvement in the partition of Palestine was influenced by geopolitical factors, not solely by the Holocaust. Historical context. In 1947, the UN proposed a partition plan to create a Jewish and Arab states in Palestine. This plan was influenced by the geopolitical interest of major powers, including the United States and the Soviet Union, rather than being a direct result of the Holocaust. Right? And this is backed up by the UN General Assembly Resolution 181, which recommended the partition, was passed on November 29, 1947. The fourth evidence is Holocaust role in global sympathy. While the Holocaust increased global sympathy for the Jewish cause, it was not the sole reason for Israel's establishment. The Holocaust highlighted the urgent need for safe haven for Jews, leading to increased international support for the Zionist cause. However, the political and social efforts of a Jewish state were already in motion. The British withdrawal from Palestine and subsequent declaration of the State of Israel, that's May 14, 1948, were culminating of decades of Zionist efforts and international diplomacy. So, the following are the documents that you need to go check. First is the first Zionist Congress that was in 1897, Balfour Declaration 1917, British Mandate of Palestine, that's 1920 to 1948, Peel Commission, that's 1937, White Paper, that's 1939, the UN Partition Plan, that's 1947, the UN General Assembly Resolution 181, that's 1947, and then last but not least is the increased international support post-Holocaust Declaration of the State of Israel, that's 1948. As you usually know, these are presenter generic stories. As I said, and I'll say again, I'm not an expert in this topic, but I'm also here to learn the black community I shared this video so that we can all learn and see this part of history. As you know, these are presented unique stories, and let's meet on my next video. If you wish to buy me a coffee, it through my Cash App account, it's on my bio. I'll most definitely appreciate it. Until then, see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.